You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back to the show, Health Innovators. On today's episode, I have Mayur Saxena with me, who is the CEO of Droice Labs. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
It is so good to have you here. So I always like to start off the episode by you just sharing a little bit about your background and what you're innovating these days, just to give some context for today's conversation.
Sure. As a background, I consider myself a scientist who happens to be an entrepreneur. Most recently, education-wise, I finished my PhD work at Columbia University in the field of healthcare, data science, like working with different types of therapeutics and whatnot. I'm an engineer, right? So I personally enjoy building things, and building things, not just engineering machines, but building, let's say, organizations, building, let's say, teams, building people, building, let's say, things that have an impact, right? So that's how I look at things.
Nice.
For me, it's fun to be in healthcare. I'm a passionate healthcare individual. I think healthcare is something that will impact everyone and already is gaining more and more, let's say, visibility in people's life. And that's my personal, let's say, motivation that, okay, how can I improve healthcare wherever I am? I'm originally from India, did my undergrad there, transitioned through, let's say, various countries to the US back in 2012. I've been here since then, working in the field, developing some ventures, helping some ventures, and now taking Droice forward.
Nice. And so tell us a little bit about Droice.
So Droice is a healthcare AI company. There's a mission for the company. We look at it as that we want to match individual patients to interventions or therapies, drugs, right? Any intervention that will work for them, right? So we are a matching AI company. If you think about medicine in general, right? Medicine is matching patients to things that will work for them, right? So in a lot of ways, it's a very big mission. It's a big vision, right? Okay, we want to match every patient to the intervention that will work for them. So it's a multi-step process, and we are on this journey. We started in 2017, 2016 late in this part. Today, around 40 people, right, developing this, serving, let's say, health systems, right, hospitals, providers of general type, life sciences companies, payers, and government agencies across United States, Europe, and Russia.
I mean, this sounds like an incredible dream. How close are you, I say we, how close are you to making this a reality?
Yeah, no, I think not just us, right? I think the whole healthcare community as a whole is working towards this mission. We see it as a very, let's say, technical approach to it, and making a technology agent come into this mix to accelerate this exponentially, right? That's how we see it. But if you look at it overall, what is happening is that most of the times, if I have to personalize the care for any individual, right? Any individual, I obviously have to work with this individual's information. Okay, if Mayur is that individual, what did Mayur eat, right? What happened to Mayur, in the past, let's say, responses? What happened to their, let's say, treatment responses? They were on this drug. How did their disease progress? All these different things, right? So the way we look at it is that some technology or some platform has to consume this information about the individual from all over, make sense of it, and surface it. That, okay, this is where this person's disease is going. Can you intervene, right? So it's a multifaceted problem. We are at this stage where we are doing this across languages, across systems, helping these physicians, helping these clinicians take these decisions. We don't see it as an AI which will just do this on its own. We see it as a hybrid of very smart individuals, doctors who are already serving patients, and then technology enabling them to make that happen.
So this sounds incredible. One of the things that we know is that, healthcare as a whole has been struggling for years to aggregate data for a number of reasons. So what are you guys doing differently that's helping you get access to this multi-source data that's going to be so important in the foundation for what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I see. I think the future is, where every individual has their genome, their proteome, their the basic everything, all the things that have happened to them, their diet history, all of that aggregated, and intelligent systems on that system, analyzing it and guiding the right people to dispense better care. Right, that's the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah.
But if you look at the history of healthcare, healthcare is a one of those dusty fields, right? Like we work with regulation. It's a field that is moving at its own pace for good reason, right? Like you can't move fast and break things in healthcare, right? Because they are not things, they are people. So
Yeah.
the way we look at this is that post 2010, especially in the United States, right? Like after the High Tech Act and the adoption of EMRs, massive amounts of, let's say, information has been captured at these health systems about patients' diseases, patients' progressions, patients, various things that are happening there.
Yep.
Now, the problem is that most of this data was never collected to do personalization of care, right? It was actually collected for more administrative purposes. Now, here comes in Droice that the thesis is, okay, in the future, we'll have all this data all organized and collected for everyone. But in the meantime, in the 10, 15 years, 20 years that are left in between, can we transform the data from as is, situation and utilize that to enable better decisions today? Right, like in this period, that's the core thesis from a data standpoint that we are trying to get to. And to do that, right, that's a very in a lot of ways an AI problem, because you can read a lot of this data, you can understand a lot of this data across languages, across systems, across massive therapeutic areas that are just not understood, and make that happen. So that's how we are looking at it. It's a different approach, and therefore a different technology, therefore a different stack, right? So the way what we are doing in a summary is we are supplying a new, let's say, care personalization stack to the market, which can be leveraged by health systems, payers, life sciences to personalize the care of the people, to get better outcomes, to dispense better care, which we think fundamentally is the future of healthcare.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very exciting. So where are you in this innovation process now?
In just to give you an idea, we work with I think over 50 health systems across the globe, where we are helping them dispense this care. We're working with major life sciences companies which are using this to design better therapies, to understand various disease populations, develop better, let's say, intervention protocols. And it's used by government agencies, right? I'm a state government and I want to understand, okay, what exactly is my disease burden? What are the various, let's say, heart failure populations? What is happening to them? Can I, come in and design a better care program? Can I procure better drugs? Can I procure better interventions? So this is where we are. It's as I said, right? It's a massive, the way the KPIs Droice looks at is number of patients we are going through, right? So that's one major thing. Impact, right? For us is a big deal. And that's in tens of millions of patients today. As a tiny little company, right? As we started, it's tens of millions of patients of data which we have gone through and impacted the care of today, right? And that's and we are a Series A stage company, which is moving forward in that direction. So yeah.
Well, that's what I want to know. I mean, and I know our audience wants to know is how did you get to this point, right? So you are really doing something that's very revolutionary that a lot of people have probably dreamed of and haven't been able to kind of figure out the recipe for success yet. And so you're an early stage company, and you've already got, like you said, 50 plus hospital systems around the world that are using the platform. So how are you getting those early adopters, and how are you getting people to grasp the potential of this very revolutionary intervention?
Yeah, I think the good thing about so I'll tell you how we started, the founding story, and where why we went this route, right? So this was 2016, 2017 when I was still finishing my PhD, right? And I was actually part of a pharmaceutical startup, right? Where we were commercializing a therapy, right? So I was working with physicians, CROs, various healthcare stakeholders, and setting up clinical trials and whatnot across different countries, right? So that's that was the whole thing. And that's when we saw that actually if you look at like diabetes, right? Like diabetes or let's say heart failure, they are not a disease. They are a whole spectrum of conditions of its own, right? So no two heart failure patients, like in all likelihood, are not the same. They actually are very different. And that answer, that what type of patient is this, what type of patient is this, is like, unknown, right? So like, and it's difficult for even a physician to decipher that. And immediately we're like, so how do people handle it today, right? Like, so people are handling it by massive, let's say, service pipelines, right? So like a whole outsourcing agency, or people will go through it manually, right? Like something they will do. And we all know, right? Like how, let's say, pressurized healthcare systems are. There's barely anything they can do, right, for the whole population if you have to do it manually, right? So at the end, nothing happens, right? So you end up like, serving generic care in a lot of cases, which is bad for the patient and then bad for the outcomes and bad for the whole healthcare community as a whole, right? So yeah. So we came up with, okay, like, can we, so I immediately ran to like, colleagues at Columbia, right? Like, and then new professors at Mayur, that, whatnot. Can we build a technology? Can we build a technology that can do this, right? It can basically suck in these various forms of patient data. And then on the other side says for Mayur, switch him from Sanofi's drug to this care program, and that will be better. Or switch him to the Sanofi's drug, right? Like, and that will be better for this outcome. So that was the whole like thesis. And immediately we were like, okay, yeah, you can do this. It can be done. It's a very difficult problem to solve, but it can be done.
Yep.
You have a lot of data, right? So like you can, utilize this diversity of disease, right? Like it's for an advantage. So then came this, okay, like, we are entrepreneurs. We are, let's say, as I said, immigrants, right? Like, so we were like, okay, yeah, let's, talk to everyone. So to your question, right? Like, okay, how do we convince these people at this stage and they to make this happen? We showed them what is possible by literally showing it to them. That like, okay, we can take this data in, and this is what we can do. I can tell you for this heart failure patient, they are going to have blah, blah, blah event in the next few months. And this is why we will get there. And immediately the health systems are, we need this, right? Like, we want to understand this. The government agency, we want to understand this. How life sciences companies, we want to understand this, right? Can you actually transform this data? In 2016, 2017, this field did not exist. People did not believe that this data can actually be used. Right, for these clinical purposes. So that's we were like, okay, no, it can be done. Here is the proof. Can we work together? So that was the convincing exercise, which was based in real, tangible proofs coming out of this information.
Which, the way you describe it, you make it seem so easy. But it's not. I mean, even when you're working in a market that the problem is very mature, you can still have challenges with convincing someone to choose your solution over someone else's. And what you're talking about, where there's the problem is mature. People know that the problem is there, but they don't necessarily believe that there's a solution out there to solve it. And so being able to persuade them of that, I think, is just so powerful. And then being able to access those early adopters, because the folks that you're talking to, if you've already gotten so many people to say yes, then that means that you've been able to find those early adopters, which is so critical. A lot of folks that I talk to and that we work with, they end up spending time, trying to arm twist and persuade all of these other potential customers that are the late adopters, right? Or the mainstream market to like, you need this. This is going to change, right? But they don't have any awareness of the need, or it's not a problem that they're looking to solve right now. They're waiting to see when their competitors or their peers adopt it before they make any movement on it, right? So what you're describing is a lot of success in some of those early commercial milestones that I think is just, it's just really incredible and worth us, even digging deeper into today.
I think so. I think we got, for us, it's a mission, right? Like it's a mission, and that, okay, we want to match every patient to, things that will work for them. That's the mission for us. So, and that is something which has helped us a lot, right? Like being mission driven. I'm not saying every startup should be mission driven, because it's perfectly fine to like look at it like, we want to build something cool. And I completely understand the value in that, right? But we happen to be mission driven, right? So like for us, it was like, no, this is the mission. So we got on the way, right? Like it was, as you said, it was not easy by any means. It is not easy, right? It won't be easy moving forward either. It's change. change is never easy, right? So,
it's very disruptive as well. It's like, how is this going to work? And how is this going to change things? What is it going to change? Is it going to change everything?
And we learned that, right? Like, so when we started talking to doctors, which was like, right, like I'm talking to a surgeon. A surgeon is like, listen, like when I operate, right, like I have my right hand at this angle, my left hand at this angle. And if they don't pass me this tool exactly at this point of time, it's not good. Okay. That's how specific they are about how they work, right? How they operate. Yeah. And it's not just a surgeon, even like a primary care doctor, even like an urgent care doctor, they all operate in like a very, very, very specific process. Mm-hmm. How can you interject in this process and change it, right? Like, that's like, okay, they're like, okay, listen, great that you can do this. Where is it? Where do I?
Right.
So, and
how disruptive is this going to be to my workflow?
and my workflow, right? Workflow is like the golden nugget, right? Like, and for good reason, right? So, those were, and we didn't know when we started, we didn't know that, right? Like, honestly speaking, we had no idea, right? Like, okay, is that how it is? Right. Like, and then we had to solve it. Right. So like, then we had to like solve it. So for us, it was like actually, but people were like, okay, like you should not do this. Right. And I see reason in that. And like for us being mission driven was like, but that's the mission, right? Like we can't budge from that. And another thing is, right. And it has become more clear in recent years. If you're in data, if you're in AI, if you're in healthcare data and AI, it's a very, very hot space, right? So your commercialization directions are infinite, right? We're still in today's market. So if for us, you get these opportunities all around, okay, can you also do this? Can you also do that? Can you commercialize this way? Can you commercialize that way? For us, you're like, well, sorry, this is the mission, right? So which is both a good thing and a bad thing, right? So it keeps you on course. And then to your point, early adopters and all these people are like, oh, that's the mission. We have the same mission. I don't understand everything here. I can help you. But I can understand. I want to help. So Droice actually was built a lot by people who just wanted to help, right? Like people from the financial industry that I know this, right? Explicitly, where like I have somebody in the team, right? Like who was, we were interviewing and like we interviewed this individual first interview and he's like, yeah, well, like this is how much I charge. This is what he's very good, right? Like this is what I charge, whatnot. And we're like, okay, fine, sure. Like great. And the interview ends. And we are obviously in the whole interview process. He's in like, several interview processes of his own. And then like, he messages us that, listen, guys, like I looked it up, right? Like post our interview, I looked at what you're trying to do. I understand this, forget everything else. I'll work for free. Okay. I really want to do this. And this was like when we were 4, 5, 6 people, right? And we were like, oh, really? Okay. So this is not one individual story, right? This is how a lot of people at Droice were and have been, right? So mission. And so that's the one answer for you, like what kept us on course, at least so far, and what helped us like build to the extent we could build with pretty much no resources, the mission.
Hey, it's Dr. Roxy here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit. What's a number one or one commercialization strategy that you think is just so critical to achieve success?
Like for Droice or in general?
Either, both. Let's talk.
I think like this is probably like, very obvious, but it's like solving a problem that people are aware of. So I'm talking about commercialization, right? So you can solve a problem that nobody's aware of, right? And and you can solve it and solve it really well, and that's great, right? But for commercialization, you need to solve a problem that people are usually aware of, right? As a startup.
It is definitely a better strategy. It's a much longer journey when you're trying to educate the market about a problem that they don't know that they have, or maybe aren't even interested in solving.
Exactly, right? And now think of it from Droice's perspective. Droice is a deep tech company, right? So deep tech companies are fundamentally different from a typical SaaS company, where a SaaS company is like, I'm solving problem A and I'll solve it really well. And I'll build so much that for any individual, I will not be able to build this much. And it's much cheaper to just buy it, right? That's the basic commercialization or tactic of a SaaS company. Whereas on this side, right, in a deep tech company, you actually don't know individual problems when you begin with, right? I want to match patients to interventions that will work for them. That's a massive problem, but it manifests as several very, very, very small problems. And you need to go in and package the product into those pieces for the systems to actually care, right? So you have to move beyond the mission. That's like for Droice, okay, that was the whole thing that, okay, why did these people end up working with us? They started talking to us, to a tiny company of no ones, because of the mission and because of what we can potentially do. They started actually working with us because we were solving those individual pieces of problem.
So how has that affected your, I think that's really important. So how has that affected your fundraising with being able to have this big, broad mission, right? That just is super altruistic, right? I mean, who doesn't want to transform healthcare for the entire world, right? Who doesn't want to make sure that all patients around the world get the right treatment that they specific and personally need, right? So you've got all these investors like, yeah, okay, sounds great, but how, right? And so I imagine as you're going through that journey, you're evolving your story. And how do you present that big, bold mission and then these very specific use cases that people are willing to buy?
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty important question, right? And as a CEO, it's one of the most important questions for the size of impact we want to create. So see, in the very beginning, right, it's still, right, even within the investor spectrum, you have people who will bet a vision, right? Who will bet the mission. And it's altruistic, but it's also like important commercially, right, for this industry, right? If I can actually improve the care for these people at scale across geographies, across systems, across IT infrastructures, that's a major commercial opportunity, right? So people,
it's still a for-profit mission. It's
right. So I fundamentally believe in that, right? Like that, if you want to actually create sizable impact, it will have to be driven by, let's say, largely commercial models, right? Business models of that nature. It can't be that we'll, you have to think about the business model, right? So, so that's like a given as an entrepreneur, and not just like as a scientist, but as an entrepreneur, it's like part and parcel of the thing. So coming back to the point, right? So in the very beginning, that commercial opportunity had to be crystallized for these investors. That okay, in 2 years we'll be here, we'll be selling this much, we'll be doing this problem well, we'll be distributing this product like this, and this is what it will look like, right? So that had to be pitched, and so it's not just the mission, it also has to, as I said, manifest into these problems which have commercial value both for the user or the customer, because that's also a business, and for us, right? And therefore investor as a party. So that was like part one. Now, as you have transition, as Droice has moved forward, now you are at the stage, okay, people are using it, people are whatnot, and you have commercial markers, right? And growth markers and whatnot. And now it's about scale up, right? Now it's about okay, you have this going very well, you have this going really well. Can I now, what will you do with 10 million? What will you do with 20 million? What will you do with 100 million, right? How will you take this forward? What rate will we move? What will the market move by? So the typical commercial markers have to be shown. And that's irrespective of Droice. That's part of that's any business.
I mean, again, it sounds like, that's any business, but these are fundamentals that, not everyone has in mind or in place in the beginning of their journey. And I think if they're going to be successful, they will learn this, or they'll partner with someone that understands this type of how do you build a successful business fundamentally. But I talk to so many people where they're pitching and they have a great idea in theory. They're pitching it to investors, they're pitching it to early adopters or pilot partners, and they're not gaining any traction. And I think a big part of that is because they get so caught up in the mission that they forget the bringing it down to reality of like, okay, but this is our commercialization strategy, this is our path with these incremental milestones, like you said, with the growth markers, and being able to have that, and for them to be for the investors to be able to have confidence that say, okay, yes, I see the broader mission that I want to invest in, but I also see that you have the ability to pare that down and focus, and like this bowling pin effect, right? And knock the first pin down and then knock the second pin down and so forth, instead of getting so sidetracked of like, I'm going to have a strategy for this pin and a strategy for this pin. And I end up not being successful because I can't stay focused because the mission is so big and I could do so many different things.
Yeah, I'll say two things on this, right? So I totally agree with what you are saying, and because you have to, otherwise you can't execute, right? Like you have to focus, otherwise what will you do? You will never be able to build anything, right? Like that's the problem with that. So now the way at least I understood and like I understand business is like, mission, right? Then you have a vision, right? So like mission and vision are two very different things. So vision is like, what will people be doing if you actually are, enabling your mission at a certain scale, right? So, okay, a physician will be doing this, right? A life sciences company will be doing this. Having that clarity is important, right? So that's the one. Then the pathway to that vision, right? I think like you should not start up if you don't see a pathway to that vision, right? Like, because it's very easy. Ideas are actually very cheap, right? Like, and like you can find most of the ideas, right? It's not that what Droice's mission is as a new mission. There are a lot of companies which have like, gone about this. It's that pathway and that approach that is different, and timing, right? Why that pathway today makes sense, right? And it might be very different 2 years from now, right? If we started 2 years later, it would have been very different, right? Like for even us, how we would go about execution. So I think context, right? Like is very important for that pathway towards your vision. So that's like one part.
Okay, can I just pause there and say, yes. The timing is something that I think gets overlooked. I can't tell you how many innovators I talk to, and it's like we start to peel back the layers of their timing strategy, and their timing strategy is when the product is finished. It's not based upon market conditions or market trends or competitive landscape or any of those types of things that really shape that path that you're talking about. Okay. Had to say that.
No, I totally understand, right? And again, like it's not like we knew. It's one thing to know the concept; it's another thing to know it for your business, right? Like, trust me, like there's no, we don't know it perfectly either, right? So I want to be very clear about that, right? So, and I don't think we will be, right? Even at like Series B, right? Like, no, we won't be, because that's what market is. It's a living organism that is like that takes its own shape. So that's part and parcel of just building a business, right? So you have to continuously assess. And then if you're the CEO or a CXO of that company, of a startup, then you have to take a call, right? You have to bet on it, right? That's the whole point of being in a startup. So that's part one, and investors want that, right? Irrespective of what it will, turn out to be, because they also understand the dynamic of the dynamic nature of this whole of this setup, right? So that's there. But they need to know that you are thinking it through, right? So like I think that's like at least in the very early stages, that's what like okay, fine, you will do A, B, C. I get it, right? Let's go about it. Let's go it. And none of the ABC actually happened. What happened was like F, G, and Z, right? So like,
which is very likely,
which is what it is. The mission is consistent, but the vision keeps evolving by, okay, X, Y, Z is now doing it like this. Okay, good. Like now we can do it this way. So that's always part of the game.
Yeah.
So investors want that. Now, but part two, right? The second thing I want to say on the investor bit is that, I have like what I understand is like a startup always recruits their investor, right? Like from and it's a very important decision, especially in this early stage at Series A, Series B, right? Like at this early stage, you have to be very like particular about who you bring in, right? Like so to me, actually, it's the other way around, right? So rather than like investors being like doing it, it's funny, like do you? So that vision alignment is very important. Right? Like it's especially in today, right? Like it might change in 3 months, like completely, but today's market is so much capital available, right? Like, and it's like, but every no matter who says what, every piece of capital has a string attached to it. No matter what they say, what they do, that is capital, right? Like,
Yep.
and so an entrepreneur cannot be naive about it, right? Oh, yeah, it's this. They are giving me, 5 million. I'll just take this. Let's just go, right? It does not work, right? Like it never works. You might start believing that it's working. That's a different story. But like for what you wanted to do, right, that might not work, and you should be okay with that. So identifying the right fit, right, like is very important. And every startup has their own strategy. We have our own, right? So we are very, very particular about investments, right? Because we take money very seriously, right? So it's very important. Okay, is the vision alignment there? Mm-hmm. So we actually spend a lot of time with investors on, do you see that happening? Do you see that $10 billion business actually being created in that high growth, right? High margin, but very, very high risk, like appetite? Do you have that?
Yeah.
A lot of people say they do, but when you start peeling the layers, right, even with investors, actually you don't, right? So that I think that's part two of the story. Yes, they will need all this, but you also need to do this vetting to make that happen.
Not just like any money, somebody money, right? Yeah.
It's not near like a lot of entrepreneurs they miss this part that you work for the money actually a lot of the times in this business, right? Like you have to accept that as like honest truth and then go for it.
Yeah. So in one of our earlier conversations, you were talking about the importance of starting to sell early. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more about that and how that has played out for you, or how you see that playing out in the marketplace.
I personally think that like the first function, right? I won't say like a hire, but a function that any startup should have is sales, irrespective of what you do. And I'm coming from biotech.
Coming from a scientist, I'm so impressed.
And I'm coming from biotech, right? Where you don't sell anything for like 10 years, right? Like it's normal, right? But try to understand, like when I mean that sales function could be selling the business. That sales function could be selling the vision. Sales function could be selling anything, right? But the first function is sales. It's very important. The rate at which, the smartest individuals, right? Like the most intelligent individuals can iterate like, much faster than, let's say, somebody less bright, right? Like, and like the obvious. However, even the smartest individual can't iterate like the crowdsourced iteration, right? Like they can't do that, right? So talking to people, right? Like getting that insight in and correcting your course based on right? Like it saves you months to years very quickly, right? So selling, and that's what I mean by selling, right? Like presenting the point and that, okay, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going about it. What do you think? This is really bad, dude, right? Mayur, this is not intelligent at all, right?
It's a bad idea.
Bad idea. Those are the conversations where you want to spend hours now, right? Oh yeah, got it. So I'll tell you, right? So this was how this happened once. So when we were starting, I don't know, like we started a hackathon, right? So we were presenting and participating in the hackathon. We have presented this idea. This was happening at like the Google offices in New York, and we were presenting this, and we won that hackathon, right? So so that's how Droice did. That was like the name Droice Drug Choice. That's how it all came about, right? So post winning, so like we won $2,000, right? So and then 3 of the 516 members in that hackathon started this company. So that's how we started this whole circus in this process. So post winning, so there was like interviews and everything, and I find like it's startups and whatnot. And then I'm outside, and then there's a guy, very smart, very capable individual. He sits me down, right? Okay, so now you have $2,500. And XYZ, one of the biggest companies, right? Like in the space in healthcare AI, they have, a few billion. Tell me how you'll get there, right? I don't think you'll get there. And so think about it, right? Once you win any competition, right? Like there are 10 people who are ready to congratulate you for like do this and whatnot. We were like, oh yeah, thank you very much. We'll talk to you. This guy we need to talk to for like, a few hours now. So that's like the attitude. And actually that's what happened. We ended up after 2 nights, like, kind of having a 3-hour conversation with this individual, where he's just beating on us, right? Just like, this is really bad. this is really bad, really bad, really bad, really bad. I've done this like, this way and this way. Like, and he's a very capable, very successful individual, right?
Right.
So, and that conversation taught us probably like 6 months of work in those 3 hours, at least the seeds of it, right? And I'll tell you, right? So that conversation then led to our first investor. That conversation led to our first client. That conversation led to a lot of other things. So it's that like negative, right? Conversation that you need to have regularly, right?
Yeah.
Regularly to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So the humility to be able to say, yes, it will work, and walk away. Don't try to destroy my dream, but to be able to sit there for 3 hours and, someone tell you that you have a bad idea, like that it's not going to work, but being able to listen to that and being able to not just hear it, but then absorb it, filter it, and go, wow, is there something I need to do differently here in order to really make this work? That's powerful. Again, it's another one of those things that seem really, really simple, but it's fundamentally something that I think just a lot of human beings just skip over because we want to defend or attack or blame or say you're an idiot. That's why you don't get it. Instead of really being able to hear that feedback and adjust accordingly.
So, yes. And that I look at it. So this is why I'm saying this, like sales function, right? So a sales function typically is, right, that this conversation is worth my time and this conversation is not, right? Even though both are saying we are interested or both are saying we are not interested, right? So you might want to convert somebody who's saying I'm not interested into like, I'm interested. Or you might be saying, okay, this guy says he's really interested, but we know this will not go anywhere. So that's like the sales intuition that you have to develop, right? As an entrepreneur, irrespective of what your title, role, or function is, right? So that's like the core goal. So same conversation, the negative conversation, or let's say not so positive conversation, you have to look at it that way. That, okay, you see, a lot of people will tell you a lot of things, right? Like the question is, which conversation is worth my time? You have to look at it as a resource, right? So that's what a sales function does. Okay, I can do 20 conversations in a day max. Which 20 are those? I can do 100, right? Like which one are those? So that's the intelligence that you have to develop. And that happens with experience. You can't read that in a book. You can't do that. Like you can't prepare for it. You just have to do it, right? And then you have to like look at, so in that negative conversation, at least that's how I understand this. This is just my opinion. The tactic that at least works for me is that I look at it as recruitment. So like, what if I have to recruit this individual to me? He's really negative about like, what we are doing. How can I recruit this individual? And recruitment does not end in this conversation. Then you have to work with this individual. Then you have to make them productive. Then you have to make them, add to the vision, right? So you can't just like, bluff it. You can't just fake it. You have to actually think it through. So that's like the tactic that I have used, which works for me, that like it helps streamline the mental model of interacting with an individual.
And how important and critical this mental model is. Wow.
I see every entrepreneur, right? Like, this is what I fundamentally believe in. Every entrepreneur has a bit of arrogance. And I use the word arrogance in a very particular context, right? What are you saying? You're saying these 6 people, right? That's what Droice was. 6 people will change healthcare all over the world. That's arrogant. No matter how you want to package it, that's arrogant. But that's part of every, like dream, every vision, right? And you have to know that.
Yeah.
Now you have to use that arrogance. It's a capital, right? You have to use that very intelligently, because that can, rub people, the wrong way, and then they're out. You have to use it very intelligently. So you don't need to, like if somebody saying, well, yeah, this is really bad and whatnot. Okay, good. Got it. Digest it, will alter it, or will ignore it. Perfectly fine to ignore it, right? And then move forward. It's your own conviction that you have to really take forward. So anyway, so like to me, that's the most important math that has to happen. And that's the mental model.
So I think too many people just automatically ignore it.
Okay.
And then 2 or 3 years later, go, gosh, remember, after they spent either several $100,000, millions of dollars, or just a lot of painstaking time and effort, right? So it's either time or money or energy in this one-sided, very narrow vision or path that it had to go, and just ignoring all of that and end up finding out the wrong way. And a lot of times when they start to have that epiphany and go, gosh, maybe that guy was onto something, it's too late. They don't have any more money. They've burned all their investment opportunity. They don't have any more paying customers or whatever that looks like. And now the company's going under. And to me, that is really related to, where you've got this failure rate of 95% of innovations that are brought to market fail. And it's not because they have bad technology. It's because of this whole labyrinth of this commercialization process and having the science, the art, the mental model, if you will, to be able to navigate that labyrinth and find out your path. And I love what you're saying is that along that way, really being able to intelligently determine what conversations are worth it, what feedback is worth it, and what do you do with that?
Yeah. See, I am by no means, right, like an expert on innovation. So I just know.
Sounds like it.
No. So what I think, right, and when I've talked to other founders or other companies, right, and who have helped us, right, who have helped us understand and develop these insights, right?
Yeah.
What I've seen is that you will always miss out on things, right? You will always make mistakes. That's part of the game, right? So there will be a time when you're like, oh no, now what do I do, right? So all of that is there. Yes, you can change the proportion of it. I think that's what you are saying, right? You can change the proportion of it by changing certain processes and your both individually and organizationally, right? Like by incorporating feedback in a more constructive way and whatnot.
In a more continuous way,
right.
That making continuous feedback loops part of your business strategy.
Yeah. So I think that's and executing that is more difficult than just thinking about it, right? So because you're all humans, it's difficult to say, if somebody says your baby's ugly, okay, good luck now, taking this forward. So that's kind of where it is. I still think, at least for us, right? I don't know about others, but for us, it's not a perfect process. Right. It's not a perfect process by any means. Right?
I've interviewed hundreds of people on this show over the last 3 years. I've not come across one that had a perfect process.
It's a double-edged sword, right? Yeah. You can't take all feedback. You need to have, stick to your conviction, but you also have to evolve. So it's a balance. And I think that's for every individual and individual business to decide.
Sure. Yeah. So this has been a phenomenal conversation. I could just talk to you for hours and hours, and we could just banter and go back and forth about these issues and these challenges and how to solve them and what works and what doesn't. But we are going to have to wrap up here. Is there anything else that you want to share with our audience? And then also, how can folks get a hold of you at the end of the show?
Okay, so a couple of things, right? Very, very quick couple of things. See, I think we have spoken enough about the mission. I'll just reiterate that, right? Unfortunately, right, when you are a patient, you don't have any leverage, right? If you go and buy an egg, right, from a group, a dozen eggs from a deli versus anything, you have leverage, right? You can negotiate. There's a barter going on. When you're a patient, you're not a customer anymore, right? You are actually at the mercy of healthcare to get better. That's actually what it is for most people. The onus is on the community, right? And that community is innovators, that community is healthcare and regulators and the governments and everyone, right? All these stakeholders to make that transaction a bit more human, right? So that's what Droice is trying to enable at scale, right? That's what we see technology can do. Can we make it just better? Can we just, avoid the 10 things that will be tried and tested and just give this patient what will work for them? That's the technology. That's the impact. That's what we are trying to enable here, right? Just make it more human. And
can I have it tomorrow?
And so for me, and Droice will not be able to do this alone, right? And so we are looking for partners, players, stakeholders, anybody who wants to, life sciences, health systems, right? Payers, any individuals there. That's how we work, right? We love to talk to people, figure out how we can package this and take it forward. And that's it's that mission, vision, alignment that I'm always looking for the community to teach me and then take it forward. So that's one. Second is, and more time, we are always recruiting, we are always growing, we are always partnering. So any individuals who want to contribute towards this direction, please talk to us. Even if it is not Droice, right? There will be other people that we know and we can just make this go forward. So that's my let's say perspective on just want to work with more and more good people to make the mission happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Awesome. So how can folks get a hold of you if they want to connect with you to be a part of that?
So my first name, Mayur, Mayur at droicelabs.com, which is the website, right? That's my email. You can send it to me directly and I'll, send it to other people. I'm on LinkedIn, Mayur Saxena. Yeah, feel free to connect, right? Like happy to talk and take it from there.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a very, very valuable conversation.
Thanks a lot for having me. I really, really mean it. Speaking to you, what I felt was that you have seen, the meta of these, situations evolve, and it's not obvious, right? Like we can just talk about this. It's not obvious when you are in the mix of things, right? Like
Right.
I'm pretty sure it happens to me. Like I'm doing this every day, right? Like I'm missing that. So having an external voice that can just, by the way, Mayur, you're not doing A. So the theory of it, but it's that detail. So I think I hope you connect and touch as many entrepreneurs as possible and help them, because I think that's what you are doing.
That is my mission, is to see that 5% success rate move drastically over the next few years.
I think you will make it happen.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and attention. To get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who shared the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.